The morning the sprinklers died, I was standing barefoot on my porch with a cup of coffee, and I turned a little brass wool under an oak tree like it was nothing like you turn a key in an old truck, and for the first time in years the whole street went quiet. Not just quiet, but twitchy, like someone had pulled the plug on normal, and everyone suddenly remembered what it felt like to be exposed. That small click, that spin of metal is the taste of what started the whole thing. And if you want to know how a quiet life turns into a neighborhood war, sit with me for a while, I'll tell you. My name's Eddie Lane. I live at the end of Willow Ridge, a crescent of houses where people think they know each other because they wave and share holiday casseroles, polite, predictable, tidy yards. Until someone decides tidy should equal power. Marla Hargrove. She ran the homeowners association like a captain runs a ship, except her compass pointed toward control and fees. She kept the meeting minutes like they were scripture and the fines like they were confession, pay up or be made small. She loved the hedge in my front yard, not because it was green, but because it bothered her sense of uniformity. One spring it yellowed and died overnight, and she stood in my driveway smiling like she'd won something I hadn't even known I was risking. I called her on it calm. I thought reasonable, and she smiled, that precise smile of a person who practices cruelty in meetings and calls it firm management. "Eddie," she said, "maybe your irrigation needs adjusting." 2 days later, the soil turned as if someone had spread poison. My hedge curled and browned, whole roots blackened. I called the city, a landscaper, a friend who used to read soil for a living. No fungus, no drought, nothing natural. It smelled like someone had brought chemicals in a watering can and said goodbye. I started asking questions. That's when I found the easement map in the county drawer, a paper with seals and a red line that showed our water main crossing a sliver of my property, an ugly, legal little thing no one notices until they need it. And there, in a sketchy notation, was a valve. Hidden. Accessible. Mine to look at, not to toy with. But it was mine just the same. I walked the line. I found a rusted hatch half buried beneath the old oak, a little brass, wool catching morning dew. I didn't plan to start a revolution when I turned it. I just wanted proof, a way to slow things down and get people to look, to notice that something was wrong. What I didn't expect was how addictive control feels. The first time I closed it a fraction, half the street's sprinklers hiccuped and then stopped. Phones lit up. Doors opened. Neighbors yelled across fences. Marla called a meeting before breakfast and stood in front of the folding chairs like she'd always been wronged, voice smooth and small. "We must find the source someone is tampering," she announced with that light on her face I'd seen when she measured people. People wanted answers, and she wanted blame. I had both. I started with tiny nudges. Water off for an hour here, on again there, a pattern that made the HOA think the city was incompetent and each other suspicious. I watched through my blinds as alliances shifted like weather. June from number 4, who used to bring over pies, whispered to Carl across the drive. Teenagers walked lawns with phones like watchmen. Tensions crackled on the neighborhood group chat. Petty slights turned into accusations: your gutters, your garden, your dog walker. Marla doubled down with a list of fines, with threats of liens, and she posted photographs of possible suspects on the HOA page. Her armor was paperwork and a public voice. Mine was a wheel under the oak and the slow patience to use it. There's a particular pleasure in watching a bully trip over their own feet. It's not pretty, it's public and messy, and you feel guilty for enjoying it, but there it is. Marla started spending nights driving up and down the crescent, clipboard in hand, pretending she was protecting property values while really looking for the person who dared to mess with her neat world. She hired a private eye who left us pamphlets. She called for random property inspections. She even had the audacity to suggest we might be sabotaging ourselves. The nerve. Then she made a mistake. She underestimated what small people are watching. Carl, who'd remember every barbecue for a decade and keeps receipts for beer he didn't drink, filmed her and her husband at midnight, digging near the property line behind my house with flashlights and a rented auger, muttering about checking the meter. They were sloppy, loud, arrogant. They left scuffed grass and a business card in the dirt. Someone filmed the headlights. Someone else caught them on a Ring camera, and the footage spread faster than her press releases. When confronted the next morning at an emergency meeting, yes, an emergency over lawn equipment, she laughed, too high a laugh, like it would pass. It didn't. June asked sharp questions. A young couple who hadn't spoken out before stood and said they felt threatened. People began to see a pattern: Marla's management lining her pockets, the extra contracts she'd quietly approved for landscape work, her insistence on vendor lists that included friends and not much else. We hit the midpoint, that moment in a story when either the protagonist wins or the world tilts wrong, when a leaked spreadsheet showed payments from the HOA to a company owned by Marla's brother-in-law for maintenance oversight. A phrase as empty as it was expensive. Suddenly, every unpaid lawn, every security fee looked like theft. People who'd nodded at her at the gatherings started whispering in her direction. My valve work became bolder. I timed outages to coincide with her speeches. I made it look like the system sighed when she tried to command it. It was petty, sure, but so was she. Marla's reaction was predictable and then reckless. She called the police after discovering the ring footage, claiming harassment. Officers came, took statements, which is when the hole in her armor appeared. One of the officers asked for receipts and contracts and found discrepancies. It turns out when you run small-town power like a cash register, things leave paper trails. She tried to organize a public shaming of me. Instead, a neighbor projected her own emails onto the community center wall and read them out loud, lines about maintaining control at all costs and preferred vendors that read like a confession if you squinted. That was the night the crowd turned from murmurs into a voice. There was a scene that felt cinematic. I still see it in slow motion if I close my eyes. Marla, red-faced, on the small stage we use for summer concerts, attempting to call order, her husband beside her clutching the microphone like a buoy. I stood in the back, and people started to ask questions, not polite, not about hedges, but about ethics, about the point of a community run by fear. Someone stood and spoke about being fined for planting native flowers. Another woman said she'd been charged for unauthorized improvement when she installed a bench for her elderly dad. The room shifted. It was not a riot, it was reckoning. She lashed out. There were threats, legal, loud, performative, in an attempt to enter a neighbor's garage in the night to check for equipment. That's when the footage of the crowbar surfaced. Marla's husband fumbling with the lock, filmed by a neighbor who'd been woken up by noise and grabbed his phone. The image, simple and ugly, cut clean through the haze of polite neighborhood politics. People who'd been fence-sitters started to decide. We called for a vote not to be dramatic, but because the bylaws allowed it, and the turnout was like an election, friends and neighbors filling folding chairs, ballots in hand. It felt like a small democracy holding its breath. When the count finished, the numbers were exact and not in her favor. Marla had lost the chair, and with that loss came audits and police interviews. She left the meeting with her gloves in her hands and a kind of stunned fury that would have been comic if it hadn't felt so humanly tragic. I opened the valve for good after that. The water came back like a choir, sprinklers sighing back to life. Kids, yes, kids ran through the spray, and neighbors leaned on fences and cracked jokes about drought and city incompetence. But the celebration wasn't simple. People looked toward the empty house at the corner and felt a mix of mercy and anger. Justice had been served in the way small towns serve it: messy, with consequences. Charges came later, and Marla packed boxes. The hedge? We replaced it with a row of stone markers, simple, permanent, a line that said we'd changed how we mark our property. I don't tell this to brag. If anything, I tell it because I felt something dangerous grow inside me while I sat with that valve, the thrill of leverage, the slow corruption of playing judge. I won, but I also learned how easy it is to become what you hate when you keep score. The cost was a neighborhood's innocence, and the benefit was people learning to speak up instead of letting one person prescribe normal. So here's what I want from you, and I mean really want. Tell me what justice looks like to you. Was I right to use that valve to force a conversation, or did I cross a line? Should community leaders be allowed as much discretion as Marla had, or should we build better checks? Drop a comment, tell me if you'd have turned the wheel, or if you think I should have taken the long, legal route from the start. Share this with someone who lives in a neighborhood where rules mean everything, and ask them to weigh in. I'll be reading, and this time, unlike that first quiet morning, I won't be the only one listening.